Have you heard of the Pell Grant? If you have, you probably already know that this is debt-free money that your student will not have to pay back, which of course is the best kind of money. So a lot of families are shooting for receiving this Pell Grant if they have any kind of chance of getting it. So in today's video, I want to discuss how you can determine whether or not your student will be eligible for receiving the Pell Grant, what the requirements are, what can disqualify them from receiving the Pell Grant, and what your family needs to do in order to take advantage of this great opportunity. Now, make sure you hit subscribe because every single week I'm releasing a brand new video on another piece of paying for college. Pell Grant is definitely one of those strategies, but as you'll see, for a lot of families, they need many other strategies to really get to that debt-free degree. So again, make sure you hit subscribe. Hey there, my name is Jocelyn Pineda-Pearson, founder of the Scholarship System and Debt-Free Degree Lab, where we redefine paying for college to help families build strong financial futures rather than ones riddled in student loan debt. In fact, I was able to receive 6 figures in scholarships to pay for my own education, graduating debt-free. Now, the Pell Grant is certainly something that I aspired to receive, and so I want to make sure that your family can take advantage of this. So let's go ahead and begin. Now, if you want more details about what Pell Grant is, we will include another link in the description as well as maybe a button around me somewhere about how you can avoid the 3 biggest mistakes we see with Pell Grant. So after you finish this video, make sure you check that out. Now, overall, Pell Grant, it is federal aid. So this is government-based funding, and it is based on financial need, which also means that in order to be even considered for receiving a Pell Grant, your family must submit FAFSA. We have an entire FAFSA playlist that we'll link to as well in the description. I have heard families say, well, I've been told that if we submit FAFSA, we're not going to receive anything. And that might be true. However, we tell every family that they need to submit FAFSA because at the very least, it could make your student eligible for student loans that they don't need cosigners for or that have better terms than anything they'd get privately. So you always want to submit FAFSA. We will also link to our FAFSA playlist in the description below. So everything that I mentioned down here, you can find in the description at the end of the video. Now let's dive into how to estimate if your student qualifies. One of the easiest and fastest ways to estimate this is actually to use the Federal Student Aid Estimator. You may have heard of this as the FAFSA Forecaster, which is what it used to be called, but now again, it is called the Federal Student Aid Estimator, and that is because it is going to give your family what they call the EFC, or the expected family contribution. That is a number that your family is expected to contribute. Based on this number, that's how they decide your eligibility for Pell Grant. Now, in 2020, they pushed through a big change with FAFSA, and so we are slowly seeing these changes roll out where that EFC terminology is actually going to be replaced by Student Aid Index, SAI. So that is why this is now the Student Aid Estimator. So that way you don't get confused. Wait a minute, what's the difference between EFC and Student Aid Index? They're the same thing. It's just that we're in kind of a weird time where things have recently changed or they're slowly changing. Now, I'm going to walk you through the Student Aid Estimator, but in the meantime, comment below. Have you used this before? What did you think of the results? Were they reasonable or were they just absolutely unrealistic? Let me know in the comments, and I think it might be helpful for you to scroll through the comments and see what everyone else is thinking. Now, regardless of the estimator, I do want to just cover some of the requirements. So first and foremost, again, Pell Grant is based on financial needs. So this is usually based on factors like income, how many family members are in the household. So this is something that is based on that income level. Another one is that the student must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. Next is they have to have a valid social security number. This is actually a requirement in order to submit FAFSA. So basically you can't submit FAFSA without one, so therefore you can't be eligible for Pell Grant. Another requirement is to be enrolled in an accredited, approved institution. Most institutions, if it's a big name, would be approved, but it has to be an eligible degree or certificate program that is approved. And then lastly, one of the requirements is to maintain satisfactory academic process, or SAP. This is basically a minimum GPA Typically, the minimum is no lower than a 2.0. So as soon as a student drops below a 2.0, then that they could be in jeopardy of losing any kind of aid that they have in their financial aid package. So that leads me into what disqualifies students from the Pell Grant. Well, first and foremost, this is federal student aid, and at this moment, students are not eligible if they were incarcerated, depending on the type of conviction that they have. Now, like I mentioned, there was the 2020 FAFSA Simplification Act, and so actually Congress has restored Pell Grant eligibility for incarcerated people no later than July 2023. So depending on when you're watching this, it may have changed if it's in the future, but at the time of recording this, this is in the works, but it's not implemented just yet. Now, the Pell Grant also ends depending on how long your student has been pursuing their degree, which is another reason why we always want to suggest finishing that degree in those 4 years or even less if we can. But the one exception to this is if they are pursuing a master's degree to go into teaching. So they could be eligible for additional federal aid if they are pursuing that. But basically, the cap on how many times we can have the federal Pell Grant is based on what they call lifetime eligibility used, LEU, and this is 12 terms. So if they're doing a typical fall and spring semester per year, so 2 terms per year, then that would mean that this would last for 6 years. So it's 12 terms of Pell Grant that a student is limited to. Now, the other piece that could make a student ineligible is if the family makes too much. So typically, your family would have to have lower income in order to get a lower EFC or Student Aid Index from FAFSA. When I say low, this typically means around 6,000 or less. So you want that figure at the end of the student aid estimator to be 6,000 or less in order to start qualifying for Pell Grant money. At the link in the description, I'm actually going to share the government's table where they show what kind of Pell Grant family can expect based on your family's EFC. Now, another exception here is, like I mentioned, teacher programs. Also, if parents passed away in military on the line of duty or as a public safety officer, this could actually possibly lower a student's EFC or student aid index to 0. So it wouldn't matter the income level. Now, one requirement that used to be in effect but is no longer in effect is enrolling in selective service for the military. So in the past, a student had to enroll in order to be considered for this federal financial aid, but that has actually been removed from the requirements as part of these changes. Even if your student is not eligible for this federal Pell Grant, again, you still want to apply. I mentioned earlier, it could lead to student loans that have more favorable terms versus others, but also many universities will not consider students for their own funding if the student has not submitted FAFSA. They need FAFSA in order to see your family's full financial situation, and so they do require it even if your family may not have received any kind of federal funding. So there are also schools that offer what they call a gap scholarship or gift aid, where they help cover the gap between what they're getting from the government and what the cost of the school is. So again, this is why we really want to make sure that we are submitting FAFSA to take advantage of not just the federal aid, but also any kind of aid through the university that we could possibly access. Of course, there are always scholarships that you want to apply to. You want your student working on those as early as possible. They can even start sophomore, junior year in high school and apply all the way through college. And so if you are curious where to find those private scholarships that are regardless of income level or even flexible on GPA, then check out my free training. I cover the 6 steps to securing scholarships that helped me get 6 figures and graduate debt-free. So we will link to that in the description as well. That said, if you get your family's EFC or SAI, whichever one is being used at the time, back, and it makes your family ineligible for the Pell Grant, don't give up because, like I said, there are alternative strategies. Now, that said, there are so many different terms: FAFSA, SAI, EFC, the list can go on, SAR. The acronyms are endless when it comes to paying for college. And that's exactly why we created Debt Free Degree Lab, our monthly membership where we cover unique strategies beyond scholarships when it comes to paying for college. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to thescholarshipsystem.com/DFD. as well as make sure that you click subscribe, because every single week we're releasing a new video on paying for college. But that said, if your family is disappointed because of the EFC figure or not getting Pell Grant, it's completely understandable. In fact, there are families all across the nation that are in your shoes where they get that figure back and they just think that it's completely unrealistic. And if that's the case for you, then again, that's where you want to pursue all those other strategies. Now, in part 2, I'm actually going to walk you through that student aid estimator. So make sure you click the link in the description or somewhere on this screen so that you can check out part 2 and watch me walk you through it and explain why they're asking certain questions. I'm going to show you why those are important. So go ahead, jump over to step 2, and I will see you in that video.